Welcome to the podcast. And in this episode, you're going to hear a conversation I had with my dear friend and colleague, Ankush Jain. Ankush is a coach, a teacher, a proud father, a published author, and a public speaker. And as you'll hear, he's on a mission to raise the consciousness of the planet through changing the coaching industry. And one of the vehicles he's using for this is his coaching career school, which he launched in 2022, helping coaches grow impactful, ethical, and sustainable businesses. And one of the reasons I was excited to record this episode with him is because he's just released a new book, Awakening the Coach Within: My Transition from Employee to Entrepreneur. And I had the chance to read a pre release copy of the book and was blown away by how valuable it is for coaches who want to grow a thriving business. Literally, as I read each chapter, I could think of coaches I wanted to send a copy to. So I'm delighted to share my conversation with Ankush Jain. So, welcome, Ankush. And the question I kind of wanted to start with, because I've been fortunate to have an advanced copy of your new book, Awakening the Coach Within, and I really enjoyed reading it. And it, as you'll know, because I wrote an endorsement for it, one of the things I said was I can already think of a bunch of coaches that I want to send this book to once it's released. And so my question that I wanted to start with was, what inspired you? Because I know how much time, energy, and effort it takes to write a book. What inspired you to create Awakening the Coach Within?
Hey Jamie, thanks for the question, and it's a maybe a different answer than you'd expect because I can't remember. This book has been about 6.5 years, maybe longer, in the process. I started writing it straight after I had published my first book, Sweet Sharing, and I do remember thinking, oh well, I've done one, so the next one's going to be way easier than the first one because I've kind of learned all of the ins and outs in the process. And then I worked on it for a few years. It was really about my early journey as a coach and probably sharing, a lot of the things that I had learned along the way. Um, but but I really kind of got back into the book about a year ago, and um, I kind of had a renewed sense of maybe urgency is the wrong word, but like this book really needs to now be birthed into the world. And so I can really talk more about that, because I'd even forgotten a lot of what I'd written about. I'd written a lot, left it alone for a while, come back, and for me, what the book is a real warts and all um, early journey of what it was like to grow my coaching
Mm,
practice. Because even when I wrote my first book, I was really clear. I didn't want to just write a book that already exists.
mm,
I don't see the point of doing work for the sake of it. I'm just very happy to give out someone else's book. And so I didn't want to write something that had already been written, and there's people who can write very well, and there's some great books out there. But what I hadn't ever seen was a book that talked about the very early days and the first steps. And now I do a lot of work with coaches, and I often encounter people, whether they're my clients or even just people who I interact with, who have a lot of assumptions about what it was like to grow um, my practice and how easy it was, or how quick it was, or how much money I made. And so I've ended up really focusing on those early years. And I do remember something that I can't remember this might not be in the book, but I remember when I ran my first men's immersion, and you may or may not remember this. And this was back in 2015, and I do write about some of the lessons from that in the book. And I learned a bunch of stuff from running that, and I was working with you in your group program. I think it was Clarity Practitioner Program it was called at the time. And so you gave me some support in running that, and I kind of picked your brain. But when I actually ran it, there was like a whole bunch of things that I learned, and and I was saying, Jamie, I learned this, and man, I learned that, and your response from my recollection was something kind of like, oh yeah, I had to learn that too. And I can't remember what you said, but the gist of it was something along the lines of, I'd forgotten that I learned that.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking in those days, so this is way before I started writing the book, like, isn't it useful to like capture that? Because I'll probably get to a stage where I'll forget it. And because it's taken 6.5 years to write the book, I know there's things that I can't remember as clearly. And it's still, I'm really happy with how the book's turned out. But the longer it goes on, the fuzzier the memory gets. It's not quite as clear. So I knew it was important to capture those early days because I end up talking a lot about it. And so many times coaches will actually do things quicker than I did them, and you may find this too, but they beat themselves up going, "Oh, well, I bet it was so much easier for you. I'm
Yeah.
rubbish." And it's like, no, that's kind of how it goes.
Well, there's an interesting phenomenon, and this seems to be a just a human thing, which is if you're in a position as a teacher or a group leader or, the person at the front of the room, people assume that there's something different about you. And so all the things they're up against, they don't count for you because there's something different about you. And that's why you're at the front of the room and why you can do it. And I think one of the things that's so powerful about your book is that it really is, like you said, a warts and all journey that takes people behind the scenes and lets them know exactly what it took for you and what the discoveries you made were and all that sort of thing. So I love that you're doing it. One question I had, I heard you say that the thing about there'll be a time maybe where I don't remember those things, where I've forgotten them. The question I had for you, you said that there was a sense of urgency, and they said maybe it's not urgency. Do you think that sense of like this is the right time for this book, do you think that was coming from the because I'll forget it if I if I don't, or was it coming from something else, something in the world that makes this very much the right time for it?
I think it's more so the second. Maybe there was a little bit of the first, but it's more the second. And so I had what I could say a big eureka moment ooh, over 2 years ago. And I know you can relate to this and the work that you do, but it wasn't just an idea. It wasn't a cool thing. It wasn't marketing. Something came through my speaking. And I'm running my school. I'm at the front of the room and I start speaking and I'm assuming very much like you that we're very in the moment and allow whatever comes up to come up. And so I start speaking and I say, so let's talk about why we're here. And this is a school for coaches, basically to grow their business. So you think that's why they're here.
Yeah.
And what I actually ended up saying was, we're not here for you to be a better coach and you'll be a better coach by the end of the school. We're not here for you to make more money and you'll make more money at the end of the school. We're here to raise the consciousness of the planet through transforming the coaching profession into one that is as well paid and well respected as any other, including being a top lawyer or a judge or a CEO or a doctor. And I spoke some more and I sat down and my business partner looked at me and went, "Where did that come from?"
Mm.
And I was like, "I don't know." Um, and someone challenged me. They go, "You do know?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's from whatever we call wisdom, intuition, a higher power. Something happened."
Mm.
And I had no idea what that was going to look like. And I've started to speak that into the world, and it's actually started to happen. I'm really seeing the power of that. And I think this book is part of that puzzle. Now, in the midst of all of that, since that's happened, and I know it's something that you're very interested in, and something that I've been interested in, is we're now in this. We're kind of in the eye of the storm in a way of right in the middle of huge change that's happening in the world.
Yeah.
And it's going to be quite interesting because this may age this podcast because we're right in the middle of it. Because at a
Sure.
certain point, we'll be in the new world. But we've got so many things changing right now. We've got the biggest one is AI, and that's affecting our world in every way, not just coaching, but everything. We've also, I think, not just got AI changing, but there's a bunch of other things happening at the same time in terms of science and technology, and I think they're all linked. So I believe that with AI, it's going to open up a whole host of new scientific discoveries
Mm.
and
For
and
sure.
changing the world. And I was watching an interview with someone who said basically AI as it is now, and this is even a few months ago, so it's always changing. He goes, it's giving me an additional 20 IQ points.
Mm.
And I hadn't thought of it like that. But he goes, as it keeps getting cleverer, that's going to give everybody additional IQ points to the point where your base level of IQ doesn't matter. Everyone's going to be pretty much as bright as everyone else. And so in that world, what starts becoming more important, and I think coaching actually has potentially, no one knows, but potentially a really, really big part to play in the shaping of this new world where a lot of barriers to entry to things are just dropping. Things are People are predicting a lot of things are going to become a lot cheaper,
Mm.
coinciding with all these other scientific discoveries. And yet, what I see, and I started coaching 13 years ago, I think, when I started working with you, is we don't seem to have made a massive improvement. There has been there are more coaches now, and there are more coaches who are doing this as a profession. But the issues that we had around the business side of coaching and what it actually takes to grow a business, I think that is still really there in the pretty much the same way as 13 years ago. And I'm really hopeful that now this book will play some role in kind of putting some meat on the bones for people around what they can do to change that for themselves.
Yeah, I really like that because there's a way in which for someone who loves coaching and feels moved to coach and called to coach, then the business bit of it, whatever form that takes, whatever price level you're at or anything like that, but the bit of actually being able to, well, it's funny, I was talking to a group earlier today and I said that when it comes to enrolling clients, I think of my main job as being deepening that relationship with having a deeper and deeper relationship with people, because that relationship is kind of the fertile soil that client engagements grow from. And so it's about that relationship. And I think that that's going to become more and more important. The world we're now moving into, relationship and human connection, is going to become so important. And I think that coaches both will benefit from their ability to develop those relationships, but be able to help other people with it as well. Like I'm kind of quite hardcore with this. I see us having this incredible possible future ahead with, the scientific discoveries you're talking about, potential abundance and that sort of thing. But the time between here and there is potentially a challenging time for so many people, with big changes in the workforce and the economy and what the different challenges that we all face. And I think that coaching and the principles actually potentially has a huge part to play in that. So what I'm hearing is that your book is helping people who are inspired to help others actually get practical about how do you do that and how do you go and get out into the world and do it professionally. So I'm all in favor of it. And funnily enough, it's one of the things that had me go, I know a bunch of coaches who I want to send this to, because it's just one of the things I loved about it is it's very practical and down to earth, and invites people to look at the things maybe they haven't been looking at, like just, using a bit of courage and things like that, that I think are so powerful when it comes to finding your way forward in this profession. So, what are some of your big insights and discoveries in the writing of the book? I know the first 5 years of writing it maybe was one thing, and then the last year has been something else. But what have you discovered uh, in writing this book, Ankush?
Well, one of the things that's been interesting for me is when I was, because I've read it quite a few times
Sure.
in the last few months as you go through that editing and place, like, so today as we're recording this, I've got like my second version of the proof copy of the book, and I'm like, it's good to go. And my editor's doing some very small changes on it, and I'm just like, whatever you think it needs, go, but it's fine from my end. So we're basically done. But I've read it a bunch of times, and what's been interesting for me is I wrote the book. I'm writing about stuff that happened the kind of newest part of the book is stuff that happened 9 years ago
Right.
in many ways. And yet in reading it, it's still so relevant to me now.
Yeah.
So my business has grown literally by about 20-fold in terms of revenue compared to where I was at the end of the book. And yet it's still relevant. And there's certain ideas that I look back and I see part of why I am who I am today is because I learned what I did in those early years.
It
And so even though, and I've been very clear, I didn't say, oh, and here's when I signed $100,000 client or something, right? I haven't done that. I've really stuck to those early days because the lessons were all there.
Yeah.
That was the foundation. And so for me now, looking back, it's so great as a reminder that this is what it took.
Mm.
And the other thing that's really nice now, which I didn't appreciate, like I've been saying to some clients, I could have written this in 2016, and that's not really true because the benefit of hindsight has shaped some of the writing that I can write from this perspective now. Like, no, that really is true.
Yeah.
But what's also nice is seeing how, whilst I think there's a lot of work to be done, and there are coaches really I think could benefit. That's why I wrote it. But there are other examples. When I started out, I knew you, and I was like, I don't know anyone else in the UK.
Right.
And now there are other examples, and there are people that I've coached um, who've even been through your programs. Um, you know, and if I'm allowed to say certain names, like one guy I love is Peter McCammon.
He's great.
You know, who's great. He went through your program with clarity, and in some ways very different to me. He's got this beautiful Northern Irish accent. He's background was in retail. He's been a kind of a therapist before he was a coach. So very different background to what I had in the book.
Mm.
But seeing it has the same principles have applied to him, and he's now able to take what he's learned from you in terms of the three principles and how the mind works, tie it into um, some of the things that I'm talking practically around growing your practice,
Mm.
and is one of the top coaches I'd say revenue wise in the UK. And then we've got Nick Bottini, who I know has also worked with you as well. Got a really deep understanding of the principles, very different background from teaching, working in the music industry, doing fantastic work. But again, different, but then applying in the same way and super successful. So what's really, really nice for me is whilst in that time period, I don't mention them because, I wasn't working with them or hadn't come across them at that stage. It's nice to see that this isn't really a book about me. And you're mentioned a lot in the book, but it's not even a book about you or Steve Chandler or Steve Hardison. What I'm hopeful of is I'm using my story as like an example because I think we learn through stories, but this is for everyone.
Yeah.
I think this is really what I am so grateful that I learned that none of my mentors really that I've ever worked with, and there's no coach who ever turned around and said, hey, listen, this kind of works for me and I'm great, and just hang around me and maybe you'll get a little bit of my magic. No one says that. Every coach or mentor I've ever had is like, hey, this is learnable, this is doable. I've done this. It's, and I can imagine a lot of people going, yeah, right. But I'm hopeful by giving this warts and all back, story of it. It's like, no, really, anybody can do it. And I
Yeah.
think that's important for me to remember as well, where I've come from in a way, because I tell people now and they don't believe me. If you were in my head like 20 years ago, it was not a really nice place.
Yeah.
I was very, very insecure. I was very, very judgmental of myself and others. Um, in my teens, I had suicidal ideation. It was not diagnosed, but like, I had all this stuff going on. And I feel like I've had 3 lifetimes of growth to get to where I am. It's not normal. But for me, it shows me that if I can do it, anyone else can. And so I think that's hopefully a story of hope for others, not like, hey, here's a book by a coach who's really successful and look how amazing he is, because it's not that.
I think it's really powerful, Anchor, because you're someone people look up to, and so it's easy for people to assume that, oh yeah, he was always the way he is now. And on one level, you were like the truth of who you really are was there the whole time, and that's what had you on this path. But you've come a long way. It's been quite a journey, and I think the book really shows that. And the other thing I really like about it is it shows it and demonstrates practical takeaways. Like the thing you kind of inferred earlier is something I think about a lot, which is that the masters are masters of the fundamentals. It's the fundamentals that make the difference. And it's also the fundamentals that are kind of the same across a number of different people who are showing exceptional results in a given field, even if they're doing it in very different ways. The fundamentals behind it are the same. The question, you said this is a book for everyone, and I noticed when I was reading it, I can see how it would be a good read for any coach. And I could see very specific people. I'm like, man, I would love, like, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I would love to send it to so and so, or I would love to send it to so and so, because I could see that the exact things they were struggling with were things that you had uh, been up against yourself, and then overcome or seen melt away, or just done it anyway and discovered that it wasn't like you thought it was going to be. Do you have, notwithstanding the fact that it would be good for any coach to read, do you have a particular idea about who's going to really benefit from this? Like who's someone who this just
Yeah.
could, like the people who were coming to mind for me, I was like, this could just be a huge breakthrough for them. Just to read this
Yeah.
chapter could be a huge breakthrough for them.
I don't want this to be a cop out answer, Jamie, because in
Uh,
some ways you would expect this would be really good for a coach earlier on in their coaching profession looking to grow their practice,
mm,
because it's about the early days. What I've learned, I mean, this is maybe answering your last question. What I've learned is, so I've got a number of coaches that I work with who are now six figures or multiple six figures, that they're my one-on-one clients in terms of revenue. And I've been sending them chapters through the process. So I wrote about over a third of the book in the last year, right? So a big end bit of the book is written more recently. And so, especially when I was writing a chapter, I would think myself, like, oh, this would be useful to send to someone. And I would send it to people who are so much further ahead than when I was about the thing that I'm writing about. And the number of times they came back and went, wow, that's gold, or man, that's so helpful for me wherever I'm at right now. And so, in some ways, it really is for any coach, because if you're a new coach, it's great because it's kind of giving you a real life kind of biographical view of like what it can look like in the first few years. If you're an established coach, it can help you see, okay, well, maybe where are some of my fundamentals that are missing,
mm,
right? So I remember sending a chapter to a coach. He was making about £50,000 a year, which is more than I was making for most of this book. Um, but he had some struggles around enrollment, and I sent him this chapter going, and I coached him. And in fact, I was struggling to get my point across in the coaching session. I sent him the chapter, and he's like, "Oh my God, that's just landed for me." So, it's useful for people to get that right, but it's also useful for coaches who are making 100 or 200,000, because it can, again, like I say, put meat on the bones around what they're doing well, because sometimes we don't know.
mm,
And I found this recently where there'll be part of my business that's really working well, and then there'll be another part of my business where I'm like, oh, this one's not working so
mm.
well, and I might get coached on it, or I might, do something, self-reflection on it, and I suddenly realize, oh, I need to do that over here to make this part of the business work. And it's like, oh, I was doing that there.
Yeah.
That's why it was working, but it was just invisible to me.
It's so
And so,
interesting you say that.
yeah,
I can think of many examples, even recent examples, where I'm trying to figure out, like, how's this going to work? How's that going to work? And then I realized I've done it naturally and automatically without even thinking about it over here, but I've been using a different, I haven't been using the same lesson over there. And it's amazing how, uh, just how it can help to get like anything that just shines a light on what you've already
Mm.
got going for you is very powerful. The other thing that struck me as I listened to you, Ankush, though, is as you talked about, you've sent it to your clients who are doing very well and they're like, man, this is gold. My guess is that there's a correlation between how successful a coach is, materially or in terms of the impact they're making, that sort of thing, and how good a learner they are, how open to learning.
100%.
Like all the people I know
Mm.
who are playing a big game, they're all great learners. They're passionate about learning. They're good at coming to things fresh and with beginner's mind and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, it just struck me as I was listening to you that that's going to be at play
Yeah.
too.
Well, it's funny because there's a chapter about that in the book. I write about, being on this journey of coaching for, I think, maybe 6 months. And I'd heard that there was this conference happening in London and it was a three principles conference. I go along, and you got to remember, this is really early days. I've been around the principles for a few months, and there's literally, anyone who's everyone is there. You've got Mark Howard, Dickon Bettinger, Kathy Casey, like just Mara Gleason, as she was known back then, Mara Olson now. Everyone was there.
Mm.
And so I'm there and I'm surrounded by all these names of people that are, well known in the 3P world. And I'm sitting there with my arms crossed going, this is crap, right? Like they're just saying the same thing I've already heard, right? And yet there was one lady there, Elsie Spittle. I'm not sure if she's completely retired now. She had learnt from Sydney Banks, and there were these breakouts, and I write about this. And so she does a breakout, and I'm sitting in the breakout room, and I feel like I'm like there's some force field holding me to the chair. Like I literally cannot move. And she wasn't saying anything really powerful. She wasn't doing some hypnosis. She was just talking about her life. But there was something clearly about her depth of understanding of the principles and how life works, where it was just like, I've never experienced anything like it. It was amazing. So I leave the room going, okay, everyone else is crap, but this lady, she's got something.
Yeah.
And so I stayed for the whole weekend. And on the last day, Elsie Spittle, they invite her on stage, and she just said, "You know what? I've really learned so much this weekend." And I had the thought, either like you've been learning about the principles for 40 years, and you've just learned something new this weekend, and I thought it was rubbish. So either I'm really clever, right? Because I've managed to get this in a few months,
Yeah.
and this lady's a little slow on the uptake, or chances are I've missed something.
Yeah.
So I love what you say, because here was a lady who kind of was more involved in this and more deeply involved in it than pretty much anyone, was saying she had learned. And here I was kind of a few months in going, I already know. And that's one of the hardest things I find when I work with coaches to break through. And I've become more clear around this now, that whenever a client of mine, and this is coaches or non-coaches, whenever a client says, yeah, I know, I'll pull them up on it, because I'll say, as soon as you say, yeah, I know, you're literally closing yourself off to any new insight or new learning. And so if you could, I'll say that now on the podcast, if you read the book, and I encourage you to read the book, I think it's a good book, but don't read it from, I don't care if you make $1 million a year, right? Melissa Ford, who wrote the foreword, is someone I used to, I still do, but I used to look up to her and like, wow, this lady's so much further ahead than me. And she was a really successful coach. And I remember the first time I met her, she was asking a question about signing a client for $25,000. And at the time, my mind was like, man, that's like blown my mind. I think I maybe signed a few clients at $2,500, never mind 25. Um, and she wrote the foreword, and she was telling me, wow, I've learned stuff, and I've learned stuff about you, Kush, and I'm thinking, but you're Melissa Ford, right? But like you say, she's got a learning mindset, and she's got that openness, and I know, if you just change the details and someone else wrote this book, I would learn from it, because I have that as well. So I think that's so important because you know we hear certain buzzwords like, oh, just be of service, or even what you've said, like, oh, this is a relationship business. And I can recall when I was earlier on in my coaching thinking, well, okay, that makes sense. Logically, that makes sense. And yeah, I can have good relationships with people. But what I understood by that word was not what I
Yeah.
understand now,
What do you
right?
understand now?
So with relationships, if we just take that as an example, I used to think that meant like, good customer service.
Right.
And I'd had a few part-time jobs in retail, so I thought I understood good customer. So like make the customer happy, smile on your face, be polite. And I thought, I've got to get good at like, bullshit talk with people.
That's
There's
what
some
great
people who seem to
relationships are made of.
right. I used to, you see people at networking events or parties, and like my wife's really great at this. She's not an extrovert, she's an introvert, but she's just got this knack of like she can talk to anyone, anywhere, get into a great conversation, and seemingly like in this great rapport in seconds.
Mm,
And so I thought, oh God, I'm gonna have to do that. Like, and that's the skill to learn. But what I've started to see is you really don't.
yeah.
Steve Chandler, who I love dearly, bless him. If you ever see him socially, he's not like that. He's never been like that. And I remember I invited him to my wedding, and he came, and his wife Kathy is so chatty and all the rest of it, and he wasn't, and that was a really great lesson for me because I was like, oh, I just assumed he'd be like this confident guy, and when he's in his element, he's great, but you don't have to be that. And relationships, I feel now with any relationship, they kind of built more on vulnerability
Mhm,
and realness. So it's not the only thing, but you know, in a friendship, if you got a friendship with someone, but you can't really be open with them, you can't really tell them the truth,
mm,
it's not that deep.
yeah.
And I think for coaching, what it means by for me being a relationship business is creating the context for a conversation where there's no judgment of the other person.
Mm,
They can say anything they want and it remains confidential. Um, it's safe psychologically, whatever that means to you.
mm,
Like there's a whole load in that which is so deep. And, I've had conversations with clients where my clients have, you know, broken into tears very quickly. But you know what? I've also had it where I've been in tears. And I used to think like, no, no, I've got to be professional. I've got to kind of keep a boundary there. And I'm not saying just you should bawl your eyes out all the time, but if I'm not willing to go there, then I can't create that space for my client. So that that thing around this being a relationship business is so much deeper than I used to think. And sometimes the way I describe it is for most people, they won't just go to any barber or any hairdresser, right? They're picky around that sort of thing, uh, and I say because it's something that's important to them or whatever else. But I'm like, coaching is so much more intimate than that, right? So the level that you've got to create relationship is so much more than your barber. And I will also say it correlates to the amount of money you're charging as well.
yeah. The word that came to mind as I was listening to you is trust. Like there's a way in which someone who's coming to you for coaching is kind of saying, I'm willing to engage with the things that are my most heartfelt desires, but also potentially my deepest fears, my most, the insecurities that I don't want to tell anyone and all that sort of stuff. And before you're going to open up and allow someone to support you with that stuff, you got to trust them. And that to me, that's about relationship, and that's about being trustworthy and full of care for the other person. which doesn't mean being all lovey over the place necessarily, but it means, how you're coming across and what you're committed to in the relationship. So it makes total sense to me, Ankush. Total sense.
Yeah.
Um, oh, there was a question I wanted to ask you. And it's completely gone out of my mind. Oh yeah, I don't. Just a very practical thing. Where can people buy the book? Because one of my coming on this podcast, I want every coach who listens to this to grab a copy of the book and read it because I think it's going to really make a big difference to a lot of people. What's the easiest way for people to get a copy of it? And do you want to
So I'm really
people can see it?
Yeah, so this might be backwards because of the video, but this is kind of what the book looks like.
Mhm.
There's a quote from Jamie on the back of it. It's going to be released via KDP, which is Amazon's own publishing. So it's going to be on Amazon. They do have some, I think, deals with other people who can sell it, but basically Amazon is your best bet to get the copy of the book, and it should be available on paperback and on Kindle for now, and then we'll see about other editions and doing an Audible one later down the road.
Well, I've got the Kindle edition as my advanced copy, but I'll be ordering the physical
Mm.
and ordering it for a bunch of people in my community. I'm going to be getting it for the people in my Clarity Coaches tribe and my
Mm.
Master Trainer tribe because I think it's going to be a great read for people. And really, I just see a lot of insights arising as a result of reading it and see it making a practical difference to people. Um, Ankush, do you have any particular goals or objectives for the book in terms of reach or like I don't know how you think about these things. Do you have any particular ambitions for it?
I would rather sell fewer copies. I would rather sell 100 copies of the book and have 100 coaches actually read it and apply it,
Yeah,
rather than sell
I
100,000 copies and not do it. And I think that's the case for a lot of authors. My first book, I think, has sold to date about 1,500 copies, which is nice. Um, but the book was never really. It was never going to be. I'm here to sell 50,000 or 100,000 copies, and if it does great. But for me, I really want to make the book make a difference in someone's life, and I think coaches. One thing I'll tell you. Here's an interesting little anecdote. So I'm writing the book originally 6 years ago, and what I would do is I would send chapters of the book to my coach, Steve Chandler, and he would come back with very few comments. He might just say like good chapter, or maybe you want to add an example here, but very very light. And then there was one chapter where I wrote about coaching being a calling for me.
mhm.
And Steve is all about doing the doable. He would talk about coaching just being a blue collar profession. And he talks a lot about that because that's the way it was for him. He kind of fell into coaching because he wanted to do public speaking and writing books, and then someone asked him to coach, and so he kind of did it as an aside in a way. Um, so his feedback was, Kush, don't write this as a calling because it can make it this kind of grandiose big thing for people unless you really feel like that.
Right.
Um, and I went back to him and I said, no, this is actually a really important point for me that is 100% a calling. And I started talking about coaching as a calling, and the number of coaches that have kind of come back to me to go, wow, we really resonate with that. So I feel really aligned with that language. So for me, I meet a lot of coaches. There's a lot of things that coaches can do to make money or earn a living that isn't coaching. And most of the time it's easier and more lucrative.
Starting a coaching
This
business for sure.
Oh, 100%, like someone asked me, a family member or kind of distant, like my dad's cousin's son-in-law, right? Like as a distant person, met at a wedding recently, and I think this guy's a multimillionaire, he's in property. And so he'd heard about what I do, and he starts asking me questions. He's just like, don't know why, never spoken to me before. And he's like, what do you do? And then he's like, well, what qualifies you to like coach leaders and work with the people that you're working with? And I said, well, I've probably spent close to $1 million training and doing everything that I do. and uh and I just said it and I was like, God, that's crazy. Like if someone had said that to me at the beginning, this is what it's gonna take, I don't think I would have done it, right? And you don't have to spend that kind of money. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
that's a prerequisite, but um I don't do that unless it's a calling,
Yeah. It's
you
clearly
know.
super important. And the thing that struck me when you said that is I vividly remember when I first made the decision, because uh, I was a contract project manager, so I was making a lot of money, right? And so I had a great day rate and all that sort of stuff. But it was a calling, and it was like, I know this is what I want to do. And uh, part of my reason for wanting to be a coach was so I could devote more time, attention, and money to my own development and learning and all these things because I, I was pretty good at school, but I was never fascinated at school. But when I got into coaching and training and the mind, I became fascinated. And it was like, oh, at last, this is what I'm here to do. And that's its own, the fact that that I've spent King's ransom in the process is sort of
Mm,
it's sort of a side issue because it
yeah.
was always about that and the joy of doing it and all that sort of stuff. So I love that you're describing it as a calling. Um,
It's so funny. When I left university, I was like, I'm never gonna study again.
right.
And then I got a corporate graduate job, and they go, okay, you're gonna have to do this postgraduate diploma. And I went, fine, but then after this, I'm never gonna do any studying again. And then, then I fell into procurement, and then I had to do a diploma, and I was like, oh, I forgot. Okay, this is it. This is the last thing I'm ever gonna do. I'm never learning anything else. And yet that's been like you add then all the learning I've done, but you're right, it's so different because there's a different desire behind it.
Yeah.
And what I think, I believe there's far more coaches who are like that in that way, how you and I are, than the ones who come in who, oh, I've heard this is a quick way to make a buck. Those coaches don't really hang around. They don't last. But there are a lot of coaches who I think are doing fantastic work, who are changing lives. And I want to say this as well because this kind of ties in with the calling piece, and I think this is important, and I think it's really important with the work you do. You said, God, 10, 12 years ago, the work that you do is so powerful in what you're teaching people because it impacts children who haven't even been born yet. And that never left me. But I love that. And then I read this book. It's up on my bookshelf somewhere. I don't know if you've read it, Jamie. It's called The Butterfly Effect.
Yes.
And it's such a great book. You can read it in half an hour. I recommend every coach read this book. And it talks about how, there's this butterfly effect that everything that happens, you keep tracing it back, tracing, and it basically goes back to the beginning of time. So we never truly see the impact that we're
Yeah.
making. And when I look at something like coaching, and it's really tied into what you said, it's like you deeply impact somebody. Well, you don't just change their life, they don't just transform, but if they're married, that it impacts their spouse, right? So I've learned, I've been impacted by my spouse a lot. My wife is incredible, and she's a great coach for me. But I'd say the same the other way around. That her life would be so different if she'd met, someone who just did a corporate job than what I do for a living. Unbelievable. I would say the same for you. As your spouse, your partner, they impact us so much. And then you've got kids,
Yeah.
right? So my son, I'm telling you now, one, I probably wouldn't have been able to hold down a marriage long enough to make it there. But let's say I'd become a father without knowing what I know, I would have been a horrible parent. And I see now so many things that I learn, I get to test on him because he's my number one client in a way,
And
right?
Chris, I love what you're saying because part of my vision from when back in 2009, I was like, oh, this is the future of psychology. My vision was of a generation of children growing up with parents who already know this stuff. So I was like, that's when we'll be there, right? Once every child in the world grows up with parents who know this stuff, then we're done. But the thing I hadn't considered was those kids are growing up with parents who not right now, like it's happening, even though it's not yet everyone in the world, I
Mm,
speak to parents every day whose children
mm,
being impacted because of what they've realized about what's true for them. And
yeah.
I think it's beautiful. Yeah. So I love what you're saying.
And I want to take it a little bit deeper, if you would indulge me, Jamie, a little bit. Is I know there's no way that your children can't have been massively impacted by your change.
Mm.
I know there's no way people in my world are not. But that's gonna go on way, way, way after we die.
Yeah.
And we don't even know for how many generations. So, my family's originally from India, and there's some saying in India around how, this like this can impact something like, I don't know how many generations and I don't know if this is true, but they talk about how it impacts generationally. And that's the way they used to speak in some parts of India. And so I've even thought about this, like, if I was the old way I was, which was kind of full of anger and insecurity and whatever, and I brought my son up in that, he's going to turn into a kind of
Sure.
version of me. He'll be his own person. There'll be traits of that, and that could carry on for 5 generations.
Yeah.
But if I can break that cycle, if you like, and help him grow up with a really healthy self-esteem, and I mean, this kid is great. I mean, I'm biased. I'm his dad, but he's kind and he's loving and he's smart and all the rest of it. And if I can help him be that, it might not even be in his lifetime. But what about, if he chooses to have kids? What about those kids or his colleagues or his, like, that butterfly effect? We never really see where it's going to end up.
Mm.
So any coach listening to this, you can create a client, coach them, and the real impact of that is it leads to something that happens in 5 generations time. And but it starts from here. And to me, that's like so fascinating and exciting and wonderful. But I think it ties back into business for me, which is just not about coaching. Because one of the things that I learned was clients are created. I used to think when I started, hey, all you need to do is be a really great coach and the clients will show up. And there's kind of this thing of like, build it and they will come.
Right.
And I haven't found that to be a really great system for
No, that
client
that
creation.
that quote, "Build it and they will come," is actually a quote from the movie Field of Dreams about a
Mm,
guy who's building a baseball diamond in his backyard for
mm.
ghosts to play on. So it's not really a practical business strategy.
Right? So to me, I learned that clients are create these things I have to actually do to create clients. And
Yeah.
for me, it's like I used to think, oh, there's some secret place where there's clients and you've just got to find that. And it was like this hunting analogy. Whereas it's more like farming. Clients are created, like you say, through relationships, through serving, through how you are and what you do. Like the amount of content you put out in the world, Jamie, and the amount of the books that have gone out, it's likely that has created clients for you and or for other people
Sure.
that wouldn't have been created had you not done those things.
That
So
seems
we're creating, right? And so for me, when coaches learn this, you can create a client, someone who, it's not like they would have hired someone else. They may never have had coaching and never created, worked with anyone.
yeah.
So to me, that's also exciting because it's almost like taking something from nothing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely like fresh and brand new and changing the course potentially of someone's life
I
through
totally
learning the business side.
I totally agree. And Ankush, it seems to me like we're living through a time in history. You mentioned AI and all the other things going on in the world. We're living at a time when we've got as far as I can tell, a kind of humanitarian crisis in mental health. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and with the impact of AI and social and this sort of thing, this guy was saying that people who actually have good mental health and are able to see clearly and not be burdened by stress and all that sort of thing, they're going to be in the minority. And actually, I think there's going to be huge demand for people who are able to really bring genuine transformation and genuine shifts to their clients, or I say their clients, to the people in their community, to the people that they're in contact with. Like, I just think I remember I was having a conversation with a mutual colleague, Mahima Shrestha, and she was talking about she was in Nepal when there was a terrible earthquake in 2015, and she had an insight in the midst of it. into where her experience was coming from and who she really was. And she saw, oh, I'm safe. I'm safe. Like even though this terrifying event was happening, she knew she was okay. And someone asked her, did you go and tell people about it? And she said, no, no, it wasn't the time and the place. It's an earthquake zone. She said, but never underestimate the impact that a sane human being has on the people around them. And I think one of the simple gifts that a coach or someone else who brings this understanding can bring is that sanity to the people around them, whether they hire them or not, whether they're enrolling them or not, just being a voice and a feeling of sanity and clarity in a troubled time, in a time of great upheaval and that sort of thing, I think is an incredible gift to be bringing to people. So I love that there are so many people who are wanting to learn that and to share that.
I have a saying that you can't outgive the universe. And it's not just a nice saying that I've picked up, it's something that I have practically experienced over the last 4 or 5 years.
What does it mean to
And
you, Ankush? I love that saying.
yeah, so I did some work with Steve Hardison, and it was kind of some real deep identity level work that I was quite skeptical of, if I'm honest. But there's no refunds, so I went with it after I paid, and it was really fascinating. And one of the areas I wanted to consciously change, you talk about how we said earlier that there's things that are similar across our mentors or people who are successful. And one of the things that I noticed that everyone that I worked with that I looked up to or admired, or they were all incredibly generous, and I wasn't. And I say my way of being was kind of like I would pay my way, but I was like I want to always pay my way, but I never want to overpay because I'd grown up in a world where there wasn't enough money. That was my story. And so a few years ago, I decided to start consciously changing that and being generous. And it sounds crazy, but it was like uncomfortable for me to buy someone coffee and not expect it back,
Right.
which sounds really weird. It was like a secret shame that I had. Like, I don't want anyone to know this, but I was like, well, I got it last time. He's got to get it next time. Well, I had all that spreadsheet
Transactional.
thing going on,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Very transactional. And so I was like, right, I'm going to change this. And Steve Hardison said to me, Kush, it's like building a muscle. If you want to go and do the big generous thing, which is going to cost you a few 100,000, start small because it's going to be too big a jump. So build the muscle. So I started off small, and what I found, Jamie, was, which I didn't expect, was the amount I got back from the universe was often greater than the amount I was giving.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect that. I didn't do it for that. And I can give you some really practical examples. Um, I would travel a lot to the US to work with my coach, and I started just buying little boxes of chocolates because the kind of, I don't know, the FDA, whatever it is, whatever the body is, they have different rules. So chocolate is made with different levels of cocoa in the US, and basically doesn't taste as good as we all know over here. And so Americans tend to love chocolate, and so I just started, and I had a huge luggage allowance, but it was only me. So I would start taking literally a suitcase of stuff like to give away, and it wasn't super expensive. I mean, if I went down to the local, like, B&M store, shout out B&M, uh, you spend £40 and you've got like a suitcase full of like Maltesers and
Chocolate,
Snickers bars,
crisp,
whatever,
Marmite.
right? Whatever. Well, no, I would stick mainly to chocolate, right, and different stuff. And I remember, so I think everyone's heard of Starburst, right?
Yeah.
So it used to be called Chew It. So I bought this pack of Starburst, and I go to the hotel that I'm staying in. I stay there for 10 days, and I just started giving them out to the staff. Like, hey, I'm coming over from the UK. Like, I just thought I'd just get a little something. So let's say I'm in the room and the cleaning lady comes in, and what was fun, this is true of this hotel, like the front desk lady was also the cleaning lady. I mean, it was a very small hotel and everyone knew everyone. And so anyway, so I give her this pack of Starburst, and they have Starburst in the US. So I'm thinking, oh, I won't bring that next time. They've already got this. And she excitedly runs up to me in the lobby and she goes, oh my God, that you gave me that thing, and oh, it tastes amazing. And I was like, took a second. What did I give you? And she goes, Starburst. And I was like, oh, but you get that here. And she goes, no, over here it tastes like plastic.
Right.
But that tasted like it was made in someone's kitchen. And I'm there going, it's just Starburst, right? But it meant a big deal to them. And I start doing it on aeroplanes. And what would happen, as you can imagine, I didn't do it for this, but it's unusual. People don't expect it.
Mm.
And, you know, we'd have, or I've had it with my family, stuff would happen. I've had my clients do this. And I just say, like, you don't have to spend a lot of money. Just take some chocolates. Just appreciate the people that are serving you. And I've had so many people get upgraded.
Mm.
I've had, one of my clients, something was wrong with his room. We'd got this hotel staff like this big Christmas hamper. We'd spent like $50 on it. The three of us were staying at this hotel in America, and they took like $150 off his bill, which was one night stay. They may have done it anyway. Chances are they probably wouldn't. And so what we said is, don't do it for that reason. But if you test it, you start to see it starts coming back. And I've seen this over and over and over again.
Well,
So with coaching, how I apply this and how I apply this with client creation is the coaches who tend to give away a lot. You're a great example of this. I try and one up myself all the time.
mm.
But the ones who are willing to really serve and give away often are the most successful.
Yeah.
The ones who are like, well, I've paid a lot of money to learn what I've learned and I'm not giving it away, often are really struggling to create clients. And they also have a thing. Sometimes I come across people say, well, it's easy for Jamie because he's really successful. It's easy for you, Kush, because you're really successful. And what I want to show again in the book is like, no, I had to learn that right at the beginning. That's what created the success.
Well, it's really powerful, Ankush. And the thing that struck me as I was listening to you is the thing that, in a way, whether it's giving away Starburst or chocolate or materials to your clients or whatever it might be, what it's the most powerful thing that it's doing is you're training yourself to have a different relationship to life and the world. And for me, it ties back to what you said about you can't outgive the universe. It almost like conditions your own neurology into knowing that you live in a world of plenty and that giving isn't a mug's game and all that sort of stuff. And it does come back in so many different ways. So yeah, I think it's really, really powerful. Ankush, uh, we're going to have to go in a second, but I'd love you to hold the book up again, tell people the name, and tell people where they can get it. So it's Awakening the Coach Within by Ankush Jain,
Yeah.
Jain. Read out the subtitle.
The subtitle is Lessons for Building and Embodying a Thriving Coaching Practice.
Yeah, and I wrote an endorsement for it, and what I said in the endorsement is great book. I can think of coaches right away I'd love to send this to. So I had kind of wished you'd published it sooner so I could send it to people as I was reading it. I thoroughly recommend it. 5 stars. I'll be putting my review up on Amazon once the book's there. Anything else you want to say, or any other details about where people can find out more about you and that sort of thing?
I just so people can find out about me on my website, which is ankushjain.co.uk, ankushjain.co.uk. But no, I want to just finish by thanking you, Jamie. You've been a huge part of my journey. You know, you mentioned like a lot in the book, and as people read it, that you'll see that. And so this is a really nice, kind of almost full circle for me to be here with you and start my coaching journey with you, and now be writing about it. And I really hope it helps, your tribe and your people just see, some of the wonderful things I've learned from you over the years, and how practical it is.
I know it's going to make a huge difference to them. It's rare that I can say I promise people that if they, read this book and read it with an open mind, it'll make a huge difference to them. But I know it'll be the case for people with this book. So thank you for writing it, Ankush. Thank you for your time together here. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Jamie.
Cheers, man. Thanks for your attention. I look forward to seeing you soon.